Okay, so moving along in this part, we can now get started with extruding some of these edges to start filling in some of these gaps. So what I went ahead and did was take the to disk and then use the connect objects plus delete command. So what you want to do is you want to select both of the disk objects for this upper part here and in this lower part, and then you'll just use the command called connect objects plus delete. And that will create one object out of those. And again, if you don't have yours docked in a palette, to get to that you can just go to Mesh, Conversion, Connect Object plus Delete. And what that does is it connects both of those objects together and just deletes the original two. Okay, so now what we want to do is go into Edge Mode, and we want to use the Bridge tool to bridge in the gap between these two edges there. So we'll right click and choose Bridge, and we'll click on this edge here, click and drag down, and it will automatically highlight an edge that you go to. You can see it's kind of jumping around, so we want to highlight this edge down here and then release it, and now that will fill that in for us. So now we want to create another quad over here. But this is going to be a little different because we don't have any existing geometry up here in this area to connect to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click and I'm going to choose Create Polygon. And this is the way the Create Polygon tool works. You click in the viewport, and then the very last point that you want, in this case we want to create a square. So for the very last point we want to double click it. And that will create the geometry for us. Now you don't have to double click that last point. You can always come over here and click on the Create Polygon button. So just to show you what I mean, if we click here, there, and we create the fourth point, but you can see it's still wanting to go to create another point. So we'll come over here and we'll click on Create Polygon. That will create it for us as well. So I just normally just double click to avoid having to come over here to click the button. All right, so we want to click this point here. Then we want to click on this one. We want to drag over here by our spline, and just to show you how we're going to fix a problem here in a minute, I'm just going to create the point about there. And then we're going to come down here and double click this last point. Okay, so you're probably thinking, wait a minute, didn't you say that you wanted to keep all of the edges in line with this red spline? Because we don't want to go over it, but we also don't want to leave a gap between it and the geometry over here on this side of the spline. Yes, you're right, we don't. So what that means is we need to find a way to get the point here on the corner to be in line with the spline. So what we'll do is we'll go over here into point mode and we'll grab this point here. And notice that if we try to move it into place, it's going to be rather difficult to do this manually by hand. So over here on the snapping feature, and more than likely yours is probably disabled by default, so I'll just turn this off. So what we have is a little magnet here, and this is the snapping feature. So if we click on that, you need to click the first thing here called Enabled Snapping. That will turn it on. So now what we need to do is we need to tell this snapping feature that we want to snap our points to a spline because we have our reference spline in place. So we'll click the snapping button here to bring up the menu, and we'll go all the way down towards the bottom, and what we want here is Spline Snapping. So we'll click that to enable it, and now when we take this point and we drag it over, watch what happens when we get close to the spline. It snaps in place. Now if you go too far, it will unsnap itself, so be sure that you don't go too far, otherwise it unsnaps. But now it is snapped to that spline. So now we can take this spline and kind of pull it down into place where we want it, which is roughly going to be about there. Okay, so now we want to create some more geometry. So we'll use the Create Polygon tool. We'll go from here to here, up to this point, and then over here to this one, and we'll double click that last one. That will create that for us. And we'll just make sure that this one is snapped, and I believe that it is. Yep, it is snapped to that spline. Okay, so that's good. And we want to keep that in line with this edge that's coming around. You can see that there is an edge here, that contoured edge, and we want to keep that in line with that. So that point goes to there. All right, so that looks good. Now what we want to do is we want to make the extrusions to fill in this part here, because that part actually is extruded and kind of goes back and it has some depth to it. So what we want to do is we want to go into edge mode, And we want to select all of these edges here. And I'm just holding down Shift to make multiple selections. And then while holding down Control, we'll just click and drag to extrude that out. Now I don't want to go all the way, and the reason for that is because you can see what's going on down here. We're running into a little bit of a problem. So I'm just going to line these up. I'm going to go into point mode and I'm going to line these up. So I'm going to take this point here and I'm going to snap it into place about there. And we need to determine how far we need to go with this, because you can see it looks like we've got a little bit of a lip on the outside of that rim. So I think what I'll do is I'll just take it all the way to the end. So what we'll do is we'll go to about there. We'll take this point, and this point needs to go to about there. This one here, take it out to there. This one can go all the way out. And then we can start adjusting these points so that they go out to the outside of that spoke as well. And then this one here needs to actually come down to about here. It's not out here, otherwise it's going to hit the outside lip. And we don't want that, so it actually comes into about right about there. So we'll just make that come into about there. Alright, so now what we need to do is we need to take these points here, or we can be in edge mode, it doesn't matter, but I'm already in point mode, so I'll just go ahead and use points. We need to select these outside points here, and we need to pull them inward. So I'm going to add the hypernerb, and with the hypernerb on, just so we can see the smoothing, I'll just pull these back. Now, when it comes to this, you can just use your imagination of how far you want this to go back, because I do not have a specific measurement as far as how far this edge goes back. So I'm just going to just eyeball it to where I think it should be. And I'll turn on the symmetry as well. And that probably needs to go back a little bit more. So maybe about right there, I think that'll be cool right there. All right, now you'll notice with the hypernerb turned on that we've got some discoloration going on. And let me see if I can find it a little better. There we go. You can see we've got this weird looking edge right there. And the reason for that is because those normals are reversed. When we use the Create Polygon tool, the normals are reversed on those polygons. So what I'll do is I'll turn everything off and we'll go into polygon mode and we'll just hit Control A. That will select all the polygons for us, and you can see this polygon here, the normal is reversed. So we can just click that polygon and hit UR to turn it around, and now when we hit Control A, now everything is lined up. Now we'll turn hypernerb and symmetry back on, and now we no longer have that weird artifact that was there. All right, now there's one more thing that I want to do, and that is I want to make a cut. And the cut needs to go between the two edges here and here. So I want to select these edges here, and I want to right click and I want to choose Connect Points Edges. Now we're not in points mode, so I'm not going to say points, I'm going to say edges. So right click and choose Connect Edges. That will create the cut there for us, and we can select those edges, or we can go into point mode and we can just select those points. And what I want to do is I want to pull those points inward slightly, so just a little bit inward, and then pull those points back just a little bit. Turn the hypernerb on. Okay, that looks good. Okay, so now we need to address the issue of this round outer lip and also that inside part, which is right in there. So instead of extruding off of this piece of geometry here and extruding that around, what I'm going to do is just bring in another disk and use that. So let's create another disk, change the orientation to -Z, bring the disk segments down to 1, and the rotation segments, will take that down to a value of 20. Now we want to be careful when lining this up. And we want to line this one up, first of all, back here at the back to where it lines up with this edge there. So what we'll do is we'll increase the radius to about there. And then we'll take the inner radius and increase that to maybe about right there. Now you can see that right here we're getting some intersecting polygons, and to fix that we can just take this disk and pull it back. So I'm going to go to a top view and I'm going to change the display so we can see it a little better. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pull this back to about right there. And there's a little bit of a gap in there, and that's fine. That's not a big issue, just as long as we get it close. Okay, so now we can take this disk and make it editable, go into polygon mode, and we can select all of these polygons around here, all the way back to there, and we can delete them. So now all we really need to do is concentrate on this area in here. So we need to take the disk and the second one and select them both, and then use the command here for the connect objects plus delete. And what that's going to do is going to take both of them and turn them into one object. But you can see that we're getting some problems that sits right back here, so we need to take this here and we need to delete that polygon. But before we do, what I would like to do is make a cut. So I'm going to grab the knife tool and I'm going to make a cut right down along there, just so it's in line with that edge right there. Okay, so we'll go back to the perspective view, we'll grab that polygon and we can just delete it. So now what we can do is go into point mode and we can grab these 2 points here, right click and choose weld, and we're going to weld it to that point right there. And then we'll select these 2 bottom points here, and I'll just go to our front view. We'll select these 2 points here, go to the weld tool, and we're going to weld to that point right there. Okay, so now if we turn on the HyperNerb, beginning to take shape, but we're still probably going to need to come back and make some adjustments. So from here, what we need to do is make another disk for this outside part here, and then use the bridge tool to connect it down to this other existing geometry. So I'm going to create another disk, and I'm going to use the same orientation and the same settings as all the rest of them. I'm going to take this up to about there, and then we'll take the inner radius up to about, I guess right there will be okay. So we'll take that disk and we'll make it editable, and then we'll just delete all of these polygons here. We'll take these 2 disks and select them, and then we'll use the connect objects plus delete command again. Now this one here, because it's on the outside lip, it actually needs to be sitting out just a little bit. And more than likely it's probably already in place where it needs to be, and to be honest, I think that actually needs to go out a little bit more. So we'll select those 2 polygons, and what we'll do is we'll just push them out slightly. Okay, maybe a little bit more, so maybe about right there. And that actually might be too much. Yeah, that's a bit too much. So I'm going to take those and just pull them back in just a little bit. Okay, that's better. Alright, so now we'll go to edge mode. And what I'm going to do is right click and choose bridge, and I'm going to bridge this one to here. And we're going to run into a little bit of a problem here. So what we need to do is go back to a front view, and right here we need to make some cuts in order to help bridge these 2 together. So I'm going to use the knife tool, and we need to make a cut right there. We need to make another cut there, and one right here. Now because we've made these 3 cuts here, this is going to mess up our round cylindrical shape that we're going for. But don't worry about it, because we're going to come back later and we're going to fix that problem. So now what we can do is right click and get the bridge tool again, and then bridge these gaps. Just like that. Alright, so we'll turn the hypernerve back on as well as the symmetry. Alright, so it's starting to take shape. Going to need to be adjusted a little bit. So we'll go back to a front view, and you can see that, actually you can see it better over here on the left hand side. So right in here you can see that there is a bit of a defined edge there. So that means that we need to make that same edge over here. So in order to do that, all we need to do is make a loop cut. So we'll grab the knife tool and we'll go to loop mode, and we need to determine where this cut needs to be. And we know that this cut probably needs to be somewhere around here. But I want to turn the hypernerve on so we can see this as we make the cut. So what I'll do is I'll make the cut about right there. Okay, that's probably not going to give me the result I was looking for. That's a little too sharp. So I'll just undo that. What I'm going to do is just make a cut down here to help tighten up that corner just a little bit. If I undo that, you can see that it does help. So right there about in the middle, just make that cut just to help kind of sharpen that end up a little bit there. Alright, so now what we need to do is go back to this circle down here at the bottom, and we need to extrude it. So I'm going to select these edges here, and I'm just going to hold down Control and then click and drag to extrude that back to about there. If we turn everything back on, it should be lined up, which it is. That looks good. Let's see if we need to define this edge, and I think that we do. So this edge right here, if you look closely, you can see that there's an edge that runs around and then loops back around and goes back up. Now we do have this edge on our model. However, it's not pronounced and defined as it should be. So what I'm going to do is just use the knife tool in loop mode, and I'm going to make a cut about there just to tighten that up. Alright, now that looks better. Now we're getting some weird stuff going on up here, and that's to be expected because we have these two lines here which are very close to each other. So one way that we could fix this is to just go into point mode and just kind of move these over and out of the way a little bit. Just to put a little distance between them. And then we can take this one here and just kind of push it over as well. Alright, now we know that we're going to be coming back anyway to fix this problem, so I'm not going to spend any more time trying to move these points around. Alright, so I think what I want to do right now is grab the cloner object, and what we want to do is drag the symmetry object into the cloner, take the cloner and change the mode to radial, and then take the radius down to a value of 0. So now we need to drop the cloner into the hypernerve. Okay, so I'm going to turn off the clone splines. Now you notice we've got some ripping and tearing in there, and the reason for that is because we need to make the symmetry object editable, and then we also need to make the cloner editable, and then we need to weld those points together. So I'm not going to do that right now at the moment. What I want to mainly concentrate on is defining the shape in this corner right here. You can see that this is actually too flat and it actually needs to be more rounded. So I'm going to just grab a couple of these points, and remember we need the splines to be on so we can keep them snapped. So we need to make sure spline snapping is enabled, which it is. And I'm going to take this point here and I'm just going to pull that down. And then this one here, we'll pull that one down as well. And by adjusting that one, all of these other spokes will be adjusted as well. Okay, so maybe we'll go a little bit more with that one. And a little bit more with that one. All right, so that looks pretty good. All right, so now what we want to do is make a cut on the inside of this hole here for the, let me just turn all this off for a moment, and we need to make a cut right in here for this lug nut hole. So in loop mode, I'm just going to make a cut about there, and that should help tighten up that corner to smooth it out a little bit, which it did, so that looks pretty good. And now the only thing that we're left to do here is to make the extrusion for this inside cap hole. So I'll turn everything off again. And I want to go into edge mode. I'm going to select these two edges here, and I'm going to extrude them back roughly about the same distance as the hole here for the lug nut. Okay, so that looks good. Now we will turn everything back on. And there we go. Now, of course, we're getting some ripping and tearing here on this one as well. And again, like I said, it just needs to be welded, and that will solve that issue. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take the symmetry object and drag it out. We're going to take that and we're going to make it editable. Then we're going to take the disk, drag it into the cloner, take the cloner and make it editable. Select all of these clones, use the connect objects plus delete command. I'm going to turn the hypernerve off. I'm going to go into point mode, make sure no points are selected, and then I'm going to hit the optimize command. We'll take this and drag it as a child of the hypernerve, and then I can go ahead and delete these two null objects. We don't need them. Turn the hypernerve on, and there we go. Now it looks like we're getting some ripping in here, and I'm not sure exactly what has caused that. Apparently one of our points has been off. So I'm just going to quickly do a couple of undos in order to get everything back the way it was, like that. And what we need to do is go in here and check out some of these points. And there we go. There's the reason why. That point right there is not snapped to this spline. All right, there we go. And of course this one here looks like it needs to be snapped to that spline as well. And let's just make sure that all of these are snapped to the spline. They look like they are. Okay, good. All right, so let's drag out the symmetry. Let's make it editable. Take the disk over to the cloner. We'll drag the cloner out. We will make the cloner editable. We'll select all 5 of those spokes. Use the connect objects plus delete command. Go into point mode. Make sure you have no points selected. Then use optimize. Drop that into the hypernerve. Clean up the 2 null objects. And there we go. And I'm just going to hide this cloner object there that we had for those reference splines. And there we go. There's our rim. Alright, so we'll wrap up this rim modeling in the next part.